Well, welcome everyone for our 9th class Zoom session. I think we're very privileged this evening or afternoon to have 3 of our class fiction writers present their life experiences. I'll give you a brief idea of the program. We'll start with each one of them giving a short presentation on what experiences have led them to become fiction authors. And then there'll be about a 12 to 15 minute panel discussion amongst the 3 of them, commenting on what they've heard from each other and maybe a couple of questions I'll interject, followed by the breakout session where Larry, our tech guru, will get us into maybe 8 rooms of hopefully 5+ each. And I'll tee up a question probably derived from what we hear from our presenters. And then we'll come back for a Q&A to the full session and finish with a wrap up from John about our upcoming reunion and the 3 Zoom sessions we had before that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Peter Hassinger as our first presenter. Like many writers, Peter garnered his share of life experiences. After left-wing politics at Williams and the streets of New York in the late 60s, he moved to LA and married an artist. Along the way, Peter freelanced writing for magazines and independent film productions. A chance meeting brought him into the world of live corporate events as a writer for sales and marketing meetings, industry conferences and trade shows over a 30-year career. He wrote scripts for speeches, video elements, skits, panel discussions, and product launches for cars, credit cards, pharmaceuticals, paint and candy, among others. He's published 2 novels for young adults with HarperCollins and recently completed a historical fiction set in the 15th century, influenced by, I guess, Shakespeare. So Peter, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Harry. Thanks very much. Good to see everybody. Also good to be here. I had to laugh at my biography. There was, it sounds pretty patchy to me, you know. Anyway, how did I get into writing? You know, for my purposes, I'm taking fiction broadly because screenwriting was a big part of my writing history, and it was made up for the most part, so I count it as fiction. It's not prose. How did I get started? You know, I was living in LA in the 70s and kind of knocking around. I had no career direction. I hadn't written a thing, and nor had it ever crossed my mind. I had a couple of writer friends. One wrote Westerns and the other guy wrote pornography. So that was when you could get pornography in a book. So one day I was with a buddy, and he was in the music biz, and we were driving around. We stopped by Soul magazine. It's literally how I got into writing. And he needed to talk with an editor. And the guy was complaining about a piece he was working on about a recording artist, and it wasn't going well. So I'm literally looking over his shoulder as he describes his problem, his issue. And I said, well, hey, you know, why don't you try that? Next thing I knew, I was writing them myself. So I got to meet some cool people like Smokey Robinson or Clive Davis, who was a big producer in the record biz back in the day. But in this period, I really became enamored of Hollywood. So celebrity, stardom, music, film, whatever. I wanted to piece it, not exactly knowing what that piece might be. So I picked screenwriting because I decided to become a rich and famous screenwriter. And screenwriting appealed to me because they were shorter than books. And I figured I could finish one. And I figured I probably wouldn't be able to really get through all the way through a novel. It was enough to get me going. I found out pretty early on, they have a saying in Hollywood. Yeah, this goes to the not for the faint-hearted. You know, in Hollywood, they say, it's not enough that I should succeed, but you also must fail. So that was kind of the culture of the place, and I imagine still is. I took a course at a community college. I wrote a half-hour TV script for that, and it was about a coroner who was obsessed to find the identity of a John Doe that had come into his shop. So, and this was before Walter Matthau and the show Quincy came about. So the guy who was teaching the class was an old screenwriter. He had actually had a credit for writing on Operation Petticoat with Cary Grant. Anyway, he liked my script, and he tried to help me sell it. And I found that very encouraging. My script didn't sell, but there was a guy in the class who wanted to be an agent, and he optioned it for $50. So I knew I was on my way. So I wrote original screenplays after that, pretty much off and on through the 70s. One was a comedy about the robbery of a sperm bank. That didn't go anywhere. My first drama was a period piece. This is really the first sort of historical thing that I got involved with. It was set in the Bahamas during World War II. I stumbled on this story by accident, and I spent hours researching it and months and months writing it. And it was all very hush hush. I kept it to myself. I was afraid somebody would steal it and all of that. It was based on a real event, which was a trial for the murder of a guy who at that time was the world's second richest man. I did get an agent when I showed that around, and I didn't get a deal, but it was for an interesting reason. It turned out that that same story had been optioned for like $50K versus $500,000 in the 50s by Universal. Sidney Poitier was cast as the defense lawyer, and the movie never got made because the family got it shut down as an invasion of privacy, because the actual death, the murder had happened not too long before. But it validated the idea that my ideas were commercial. So I felt like I was, in the right ballpark. It also taught me that this is a Hollywood thing, the universe of ideas is much smaller than you would think. So you may have an idea, but probably there are 2 or 3 other people who had something along the same lines. I did get paid for a couple of features that I wrote for small independent productions. Not a lot of money. And of course, the movies didn't get made, but I had found a way to, work and earn to a certain extent. And then, as Harry mentioned, one day I met a guy at a party who did training films, and he asked me if I would be interested in working with him, writing a couple of those while I was waiting for my Hollywood ship to come in. So that was how I got sent down the corporate avenue. And that was actually really good for me, because it was a serious discipline, because first of all, I was earning. So I now had found a way to support myself by writing, for which I'm very grateful for. And some of them, as you mentioned, it was interesting. They were big industrial productions with, music and performers and choreographers and screen things and so on. So that allowed me to earn. And then, but I continued to work on screenplays along the way, because that was really my first love at the time. I had one near fame experience in the 80s on a project that I did with a co-writer. We cooked up a story about Shakespeare called Dark Lady, and it was based on his romance with the Dark Lady figure from the sonnets. Terry and you other English majors should remember that. We got a development deal with an independent Canadian production company, and that went through various iterations, and it was like a decade later, we end up in litigation, and our picture never got made like all the other ones. Apparently, however, litigation is a perfectly legitimate way to make money in Hollywood. So that was an important learning. I left LA for New York, met a children's book publisher who read my script for that project and asked me if I had ever thought about writing a story, that story from like a kid's point of view. So that became, and some of you guys may remember that I did the Book of Alfar and Shakespeare's Daughter project in the early first decade of this century. It was in the bookstore in Williamstown. The thing for me was it was a real light bulb because I was suddenly writing the thing that I had avoided all those years earlier when I picked screenwriting. I really enjoyed it. I like writing prose and I like historical fiction. So over the past 10 years, I've written 2 novels for historical fiction. They're also based on real historical people. One was about the 14-year-old mistress of a Renaissance prince. Well, I could not get an agent for that, and that lives in the drawer. The second is the one Harry mentioned, which I finished this year, set in the 15th century, about a young medical student who investigates the murder of a young Christian boy that was blamed on the Jews. It was a pogrom in 1475. I had an agent for a few months, but he gave up after only about 20 submissions. So I'm looking for someone new for the book version. But I've also decided that I'm now adapting my novel as a miniseries. So I wrote 2 first screenplays, the first 2 one-hour dramas of it. It's a bit kind of backwards way of trying to sell the book, but I think the idea is to keep writing. Sometimes, why do I do it? Why don't I do something simple like building ships in a bottle? Anyway, it's just an itch that can't be scratched, but it does keep me hopeful about my possibilities in life. So I intend to carry on. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. And you've been published. That's the goal of, I guess,
Yes.
every writer. And Jim's up next.
Okay.
Jim, let me give a brief intro. You have an interesting life that I can summarize in about 4 sentences. But he describes his life as repeatedly peeling back the layers of an onion. And this is from being an anti-war liberal at Williams through a Maoist phase, an academic phase, a survey research phase, and then years as a communications consultant specializing in crisis and issue management. He's lived with his spouse, also named Jim, in New York, London, Paris, Moab, Utah, and now in Tucson. Since retirement, he's been on the board of several arts organizations and has been writing short stories, 10-minute plays, and has 1 published novel and 2 more books in the drawer. So you're on, Jim.
Thank you, Harry. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I apologize for my voice. I'm taking some meds and it seems to have done something to my larynx. So I started writing very late. I was sort of easing into retirement. We had already moved to Moab. And I started by writing up new things that were happening to me, to us, living out west. And they were little sketches and I would send them to friends. And then I discovered this 10-minute play thing, which I guess started in the 70s sometime. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen, they usually have an evening of 10-minute plays. But I really fell in love with that genre. Sort of like Peter was saying, it's something you can do. It's not like writing a novel or a full-length play. And over the years, I've written some 15 of those, and 9 of them have been produced in various places around the country. And oddly, I actually seemed, more of them are comedies than drama. So that surprises me, but apparently I can write a pretty funny 10-minute play. What I tend to do, I've also written a lot of short stories. In fact, I was working on one today. And what I tend to do is I come up with an idea, usually based on something real, either something I read in the paper or somebody I know or a situation that I heard about. And I start thinking about it and then I say, well, would that make a 10-minute play? Would that be a good short story? And then end up dropping most of them because it turns out that it doesn't work at all. So that keeps me busy imagining things. And then I also write a lot of nonfiction. When we go on a trip, I usually write a travelogue. And I also was, before the pandemic, I was working on a book about surviving your 70s. It's supposed to be funny. And it's based on just stuff that I've thought about and heard about surviving your 70s. And then the pandemic hit, and it's kind of still in the drawer. So I do write fiction, and I'll get to the novels in a second. I do write fiction, but I really, most of the time now that I'm writing, it's short stories, the plays, and continuing to write some nonfiction. So how did I end up writing, as it turns out, 2 novels, only one of which exists as a book? I had it on the tape a second ago. There it is. It all started, I had this career, and everyone said, oh, you should write a memoir. So I sat down and I wrote a memoir, and it really was not very interesting. It was interesting to me, and later on, maybe we'll talk about memoirs. I think it's interesting to families, but it wasn't what it was. It was about my career, and I also discovered in the course of doing that I felt very constrained about writing about other people, clients or people that I knew or worked with. I was worried about hurting feelings. I was thinking, oh, they're not going to like it if I say that, or maybe I'm remembering that wrong. So my whole memoir has very little in it except for me. And so then I thought, well, but people are still saying, well, gee, you did so many interesting things. Maybe you should write something. So I said, well, maybe I should write fiction. So I wrote 2 fiction books. One which is not published, and I'll explain why, is called Accommodations, and it's the story of the relationship between 2 men through all the things that if you're a gay person, you've been through in the last 40 years. The closet and AIDS and ask, don't tell, and suddenly you can get married and all these things. And so it's a story about their relationships over the years, played off against a more modern heterosexual relationship. And then the other book was more about the stuff that I did, and that's called Spin. And here it is. And that one is published, but how did it get published is the question. When I did Accommodations, I went down through the traditional system of trying to get an agent, and then trying to get somebody, and approaching publishing houses and so on. And as Peter can tell you, and as Terry can tell you, and probably a lot of you have maybe done this, it is tough. And particularly if you're in your 70s, no agent, even if you're a fabulous writer, no agent's going to see a stream of opportunity in somebody that old. So I spent, 6 months trying to sell that book, and I got all these nice letters back. Gee, it's so nice, and it's such an interesting topic, and you write, I would send them stuff, oh, you write so well, but no thanks. So then I wrote Spin, and I started to do the same process, and the same thing happened. But I said, well, screw it. I've heard about this self-publishing thing. So then I spent a couple of months looking at self-publishing, and I ended up paying a company called Wheatmark to publish this book. And so they published, I worked with them, and the proofreading and the cover and all the layout and all this stuff, and the book gets published. And it got very nice reviews. A couple of them were written by some of the people on this call, and has sold 100 copies. Because when you get into book marketing, you are in a crazy difficult world. And if you self-publish, they don't do it for you. If you have a publisher, they're supposed to do it for you. But I can tell you, because I have friends who have had books, it is a tough, tough business of trying to get reviews, of doing book signings, of trying to get Oprah to do your book, whatever. It is a very, very tough thing. What's happening in publishing right now is there in the last year, I think that I had data was 2018. There are about 1.6 million self-published books. And the publisher publishing books is about 30 to 40,000. Okay, so that's a very, very busy market. And if you think that you can break through, God bless you. I mean, you'll break through if Oprah picks you up or if Reese Witherspoon picks you up. But the fact is that very, very good books are being written that very, very few people are reading. And if you self-publish, it's very, very rare that your book is going to be a big success. So the question then is, why write and why publish? Well, I know I write. I think Peter said it as well, and I think Terry will say it, because I love to write. It's like a huge, wonderful pastime for me. You know, I also do other things. I hike, I play golf and stuff, but I really love to sit down and write. As I said, I spent most of the afternoon finally, I think, coming up with an ending for this short story. For me, writing is a joy. The hard part is coming up with the ideas. The easy part is doing the writing. That's, you know, the way it works for me. So why do you want to publish? Well, you know, obviously you want to publish because if you're an artist, you want to be shown, and if you're a writer, you want to be published. But in this world, I can pretty much promise you that even if you get published, you probably won't make, you know, you probably won't have a bestseller, and you probably won't make a lot of money. So you may want to publish because you can, you know, send out Christmas gifts. You may want to publish because you want something for your grandkids, or something that sits on your shelf, or something to give as Christmas gifts. So there are lots of, you know, reasons to do it so that you have the thing there, but don't try to do it for fame or fortune, because probably that's not going to work. So, you know, my bottom line from my experience is, if you love to write and you want to publish, you can publish, and you can have a book, and nothing can hold you back from that. But you have to know why you're doing it, because at the end of the day, you're probably not, unless I guess you get into a litigation, Peter, you're not going to be making a lot of money or become famous, particularly at this stage of life. So,
What a fascinating ride, Jim. Sounds great. Too bad you didn't start at 25, but I know, you know, life goes on. Next up, Terry. Terry Sands went to the University of Virginia Law School and was a partner specializing in real estate, or as he calls it, dirt law, with a small Boston law firm. And then he was appointed a judge in the Massachusetts Land Court. He thinks that that was the most satisfying part of his legal career. Besides running marathons and directing summer theater musical performances, Terry achieved new heights at age of 70 by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Following recent hip surgery, Terry is scaling some smaller peaks in New Hampshire. How about 52 with a view, Terry? There are a lot of them out there.
All right.
He's used his legal background to write several legal mystery novel manuscripts and will happily accept all suggestions for how to publish them. Well, I think you just got some from Jim, so take it away, Terry.
Okay. Thanks, Harry, and welcome everybody. So I started thinking about this, you know, why am I writing fiction? And I think the basic question is, why am I writing? And unlike Jim and Peter, my career has been nothing to do with writing or publishing or anything like that. I've been a lawyer and then a judge. But as both Jim and Peter pointed out, you have to have a love for writing. And ever since I was a little kid, I have loved writing, and I've also loved theater. And you'll see from what I'm telling you, there's been a big connection in my life between theater and writing. I started directing plays when I was 7 years old in my neighborhood, and the first show I ever produced was Shakespeare's Macbeth. And my sister was 4 years old, and she was a witch, and she fell into the cauldron. And then later on, I did a lot of productions in my neighborhood. When I was about 12 or 13, I produced Treasure Island. I rewrote these things, obviously wasn't the original thing. And my best friend, who was very tall, was Long John Silver, and he had to tie his leg up behind his back. And then my third production that I really remember, I did Romeo and Juliet when I was 15 or 16, madly in love. And my girlfriend played Juliet, and she had a house with a balcony on it. So I did a lot of theater then, and I was editor of my school newspaper. So writing was a big part of my life. Then I went off to Williams, and I must say, I don't know if I got, my only memories of English at Williams were terrifying. I remember I majored in English, and so I had to go before my senior year, before a panel of professors. If you majored in something, you had to do this hearing. And I was so scared, and I went in there, and I can't even remember what I talked about, but I must have made some sense because I graduated from Williams with a major in English. And then I went off to law school, and for all of you who see TV programs and movies and read books, drama is, law is a big part of drama today, and it's the basis for the two novels I'll tell you about in a minute. So I did moot court while I was at law school, and that satisfied my urge for a while. Then I came out and started practicing law, and I wasn't a litigator at the beginning. I was a transactional lawyer, but I did a lot of hearings before local boards, planning boards and zoning boards. And it was like putting on a mini play, because I had to take witnesses, architects, and people who were trying to develop their property. And just writing I had to write a little script every time I went out to practice law before a local board. But that was my profession. My love was theater, and I did a lot of acting in community theaters. I wrote shows for the local yacht club. I wrote shows for a number of different organizations. And then while I was a lawyer, I participated in Shakespeare and the Law, where we did a reading from a Shakespeare play, and then we talked about the legal ramifications, and that was fun. So I was trying to mix my career and my my love of theater. And then things started coming together. In the 1990s, two things happened in my life that I don't know if they really had a connection, but I lost both my parents, and both my kids went off to college. And so my cocoon, of parents and kids disappeared. And it was at that time that I did two things. I took over directing this community theater I was involved with, and we have done research and found out it is the oldest continually operating community theater in the entire United States. So that I'm pretty proud of that. And we're continuing. We do a major musical every summer, and we do a kind of a cabaret in February, and that's been a great love of mine. But the other thing is, also in this period of the 1990s, when things were changing in my life, I wrote two legal mystery novels, and that was fun. It's in my DNA, as Jim and Peter said, you got to like to write. So I love writing. And then I said, well, since I've written them, why not try to get an agent? So I sent letters out to, I hate to think, hundreds and hundreds of agents. And I could wallpaper my entire house with rejection letters. But I had, out of all of those, I had about 10 agents who wrote me back and said, wow, you're a good writer. You really had some great ideas, but not enough that they would take it. But I finally found an agent. And she wrote me back a whole series of comments. She said, I really like it. You're a good writer. Make these changes, and then maybe we can go somewhere. But 6 months later, I got appointed to the bench, and that took over my life. I was becoming a judge, which in law is everything. And so I deep six, even with the comments this woman wrote, I deep six my novels, and was on the bench for 15, 16, 17 years. And they sat in my drawer because I loved being a judge. And so that kind of took over my life. Then I retired and COVID came. And so I was cleaning up my office and I found these 2 novels, including the one with all the comments. So in the last 2 years, after 20 years, I rewrote both novels. And so I'm now in the process of trying to get them published. They both are legal mysteries, and I'm told that that's a hot topic today. Both of my protagonists in both novels are young to middle-aged lawyers, and one involves a lawyer who goes off to Italy with he's divorced, and he goes off with his 2 kids and gets involved in a pornography crime over in Italy, and then that, well, it works itself out. The second novel is also a lawyer who is investigating a private airplane crash involving a U.S. senator, and he gets involved in a whole different world. And so the writing part is kind of interesting. Long before I started writing, I love to travel. And my first novel a lot of it takes place in Italy. And my second novel, a lot of it takes place in Hawaii. And I can remember both places going to local places and saying, wow, this would be a great location for a story. But I had no story in mind at the time. And so I came back and adopted these things. And that's, they were a big part of my novels. So ideas for novels. I've gotten ideas when I was a lawyer, when I was a judge, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, I've run the Boston Marathon about 10 times, and a key scene in my first novel takes place during the Boston Marathon. So ideas I have no problem with. My life experiences have done that. I've got a file that I've got 10 ideas for 10 of the novels. I don't know if I'll ever get to them, but I've got a lot I'd like to write about. So, so I'm thinking today about why is it I write, and other than the love of it, and it's in my DNA. And number one, ever since I've retired, and maybe a lot of the people listening tonight feel this way, I was terrified of retiring. And writing gave me a goal. And, when I found these novels and I rewrote them and now playing around with them, and I'm actually working on a 3rd novel right now, it's given me a goal, and I need a goal. I've always needed a goal, and retiring, I kind of lost it. So I've got that back. The creativity, I love that. When I was a judge and I wrote my decisions, what I often did is I tried to put creative footnotes in. I would quote from Shakespeare, or I would quote from Alfred Lord Tennyson, or Robert, the author for Treasure Island, Stevenson. I would quote them in footnotes because I was always trying to get the creative juices going. But one thing I've discovered in the last 2 years, that the reason I really love to write, number one, I've discovered a lot about myself. In writing these stories, there's a lot of me in both of my protagonists. They're lawyers, and so that was my career. But I've also just discovered a lot of things about myself that I really hadn't focused on, that I hadn't done. The other thing is, I've done research in both novels. Like there's a erupting volcano in the Italy one, thinking back to Mount Vesuvius and what happened in Pompeii. And, even at this age, researching, learning, is still a lot of fun. What I've done since I've come off the bench is I teach in law school. I teach 2 courses in law school. And I'm also doing a lot of mediations. And the teaching, I've created a class in law school that didn't exist before. So the creativity is there, and it's kind of looking around. So many of you who maybe are retiring or thinking or partly retired, you may have the same interest that I do of being creative and learning more about yourself and more about the world around you. And finally, publishing. At the beginning, when I first wrote these novels 20 years ago, I really wanted to be another John Grisham. I thought that would be kind of cool. But now my total interest is in having stuff for my family, for my kids and my grandkids to be able to read, getting something down on paper that would be helpful. And so what I've done, I read on the blog somewhere that as editors say that they only take 1% to 2% of stuff that they read. And they said the writing in about 25 to 30% is phenomenal, but they don't take it. So, as Jim and Peter both pointed out, this a very long shot, and that's not what I'm interested in. So I've hired an editor, and I'm paying them, who is actually starting to read my novel. And he said, wow, I really like this. And he made a suggestion to me that I've taken up. He's up until now, I've let my wife and my sister and my daughter all read the stuff, but I hadn't really kind of given it out. And this editor I'm working said, you've got to get other people to read it. So I've given it to friends, former law partners, a doctor. And I'm getting terrific responses from them. My favorite one is a doctor who said, I was up all night, I couldn't put it down. It's a real page turner. So that was kind of cool. But my favorite one is one of my old law partners who said, I didn't know you knew how to write like this. You wrote legal briefs, but that's totally different from a novel. He said, did you have a ghost writer? That's my favorite comment. And it's encouraging. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out now what it's all about and if there's any future to the writing. But you got to love to write. You can't want to just get published and become famous. That's not going to work. So anyway, that's kind of my story. And thanks, Harry.
So Terry, you've got at least 40 of your classmates here who'd love to see your novel, and I'm sure we give you some feedback. It sounds like fascinating stuff. We might even help you finish it. I remember 20 years ago, you were asking for somebody to write the last chapter. So
well, what I did in that last chapter, I've written the last chapter, but I've left it kind of ambiguous, and leaving it up to readers to kind of come up with their own ending. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to do it. We'll see if I self-publish it or whatever. But anyway, it's been a blast writing. I just, as Jim and Peter both said, I love to write. It's in my DNA. And, I told you about my life. It's always been there, that in theater. And I see a great combination of the two. The theater helps me write dialogue, I think.
Oh, so we have a question from Jim Allen. I don't know if it was a bit in jest, but he's asking, how do you write? Do you write with a pencil? Do you hunt peck? Do you write on a computer, longhand?
When I first wrote my novels, again, this was 20 years ago, I started it out in longhand. I just wrote. And then I converted over to a computer, and then everything I do now is on the computer. But initially it was I've still got copies of the longhand I wrote for my first 20 chapters of my first book. That's not a good way to do it.
Does anybody write in dictation, like, talk through it? And
not I use a computer. I've used a computer for years. But one thing is, in terms of storytelling, because of my screenwriting background, and so much of screenwriting is plot driven, I do outline, and I learned to outline, and I have done, big sheets of paper with magic marker, and I'll try and figure out what the sort of important steps and turning points in a story are. You throw them out and start over, but otherwise I'm always on a machine. Jim?
Yeah, no, I do something similar. I have a yellow pad with you could call it an outline, it's sloppier than that. Inevitably, the outcome is not that. Inevitably, I'll start down that, and then I'll say, well, that's not going to work. And then I have to redo it and redo it and redo it. But, sort of like when you used to write papers at Williams, you have to have some, at least I do. But of course, I write on a computer. That's my whole career was,
Right.
I couldn't imagine writing longhand, wow.
Oh, gee.
I get cramps.
That was fun. Jim and Peter, something, we've talked several times in preparation for this. One thing we never discussed, on both of my novels, when I started writing, I had an idea. I had no clue how the novel was going to end. No clue at all. And it just evolved as I started writing. Did either one of you, did you know when you first started writing how you were going to end it?
No, as I say, I thought I did, but by the time I got somewhere through, as you write a character, you write a scene, sometimes it truly, this is not bullshit. It actually takes off, and things start to happen, and suddenly you realize, oh, wait a minute, we're going in a whole direction I didn't even think of before, and I like it. So now, how does it change? What about you, Peter?
Yeah, I've had the experience of, I don't usually know it when I'm starting out, but at some point during the story, as we're saying, I start to get an image of what it might be. It's provisional because, as you say, things are still percolating, so I'm not 100% sure. But the further on I get, either I validate that idea and try and head that way, or come up with another alternative.
Yeah, or sometimes
Did the
you realize you have
characters
to go
take you?
back.
Yeah. Do your characters kind of take you along the way? And so they help you finish. I mean, that's what happened with me, that my characters told me what to do.
Yeah, yeah. And, I usually, like in a short story, I'll think through the backstory of someone, which I may not use a lot of it in the actual thing. But if I don't know where that person came from and sort of what their story is, I can't write about them. But then they come alive in the dialogue, and they go off in new directions.
I had a story on this most recent project. I based stuff on real historical events. So there's like a skeleton of what actually happened. And then I will have my protagonist is made up, and then he comes into that kind of scenario and stuff happens. But I couldn't decide. I had 3 guys, and I couldn't decide who it was. But I was in the 92nd Street workshop for like 3 years working on this story, and it was there from getting feedback from people that I finally landed on the right person for me. And then it's true, it does take off. I do also really find that it's really helpful to do the backstory bit. What's the ghost for the character they talk about in screenwriting all the time, and how are they, what's their past, so it helps to, create the arc, the trajectory that you're trying to, and inevitably somewhere along that path, an ending image will come up.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting how that works.
Yeah.
This session is fascinating because the 3 of you are helping each other out in what you do, what you want to do, where you want to go with it. I think this is a remarkable opportunity. And I hope you guys will continue. Plus, some of the rest of the class would love to read your drafts as you go forward.
Well, by the way, I just finished one of Peter's books. It's a terrific book. It's for young adults, okay?
Right.
But it's a very sophisticated book.
We'd all like to be young adults again, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, the heroine is a young lady, Shakespeare's daughter. But what he's done here between the historical basis that he works from and some really beautiful descriptive writing for a screenwriter to write some of this stuff, it's pretty impressive. He's really constructed a whole world here that is quite amazing. So Peter, why Why didn't you stick with this kind of young adult historical?
Well, you know, why didn't I stick with young adult? I actually did want to write a novel for adults. And this was the opportunity that came about first. So, you know, and that was, I guess, so I got a deal to write those 2 books. And that was how I got into novel writing. But I still wanted to do something that grownups could enjoy as well. I just want to say, you beat me to it. Is that Jim's book? You can buy Jim's book. Our books are not available. And Jim's book, I laughed my butt off, man. I think it's great, you know. You know, like you said, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like a freshman class at Williams. Hey, you can, you know, probably get 4 or 5 of perfectly qualified classes, but you know, only one class is going to get sat, you know. And it is true for books. Anyway, it was really a lot of fun. I'm halfway through Terry's book, which I'm also enjoying, and the mystery is very good. We'll talk to you about. I'll give you a call after I get through to the end. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but
This is great, guys.
We got to
Hope it
stop. We're just
continues.
getting warmed up.
Well, you can warm up in the breakout room with some of your other classmates. We're going to turn it over to Larry, who will break us out.
What I've done,
Well, yeah.
there's going to be, I think, 4 highlighted speakers tonight will be in each room as moderators, and then Huff, Alan Stern, and Ken Wilcox will be in the other rooms as moderators. And did you have a discussion topic, Harry?
Well, here's a kickoff, very general topic for discussion. In all our lives, our experiences have provided us with interesting stories to tell. Has each one of you taken an opportunity to write something down about these stories, or maybe more particularly at our age, as mentioned by the panelists, memoirs? Point of discussion.
Okay, the breakout rooms are going to be 13 minutes. I'll give you a 3-minute warning and then a 60-second warning. Have fun.
Okay. How we doing, Larry?
You're doing all right that I know of.
Okay.
Last time I checked.
Yeah. See,
Peter,
John
how did it
Cannon.
go? How did it go in the room?
Oh, it went fine, actually. It was interesting. And yeah, we did take up Harry's question, and people were doing different things, but most people in careers have to write stuff. So
I'll
you know,
tell you what
one
I'm going
form
to
or
do.
another.
I'm going to mute everyone. And once I do that, Harry Tether, you'll have to unmute yourself so you can see if people want to ask questions by raising their hand. So I've muted everyone. Harry Tether, you'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can I see the full Zoom session?
You want to see everyone? Go to gallery view, up the view.
Yeah, okay.
You got it?
So what I'm looking for now is someone with a question, and raise your hands and I'll try to call on you. Bill, I see your hand first. Unmute yourself and you can ask.
Okay, my question is for Peter. I'm curious as to why he's focused on 14th and 15th century for his work. What drew him to that period in time?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, I was muted. Didn't see. Hey, Bill. How are you? Good
Hey,
to see you,
Peter, how
man.
you doing?
Yeah,
I
I'm all
was
right.
telling my breakout room how they were asking if I've written, and I said I've never written anything, but you keep saying you want to write my life, and I keep putting you off.
Well, it's both of them are still available. Your life and my life, you know. So I'm always happy to have that conversation when you're ready. So, well, you know, the Shakespeare story was 16th century. Obviously, that was the 1500s, and I got into the 15th century in an odd way. I was reading. This makes me sound more of an intellectual than I actually am. One day I'm reading Ezra Pound's cantos, you know, and I see, and there's a canto in there about a guy named Sigismondo Malatesta, who was a famous Renaissance prince and a mercenary warrior who was successful at a very young age. And I really liked it when I was reading Pound. And he had a like a 14-year-old mistress, and I thought, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So I ended up going and looking at the listings for the books and materials that Pound used to write his canto, and then I started pulling them in, and then that was how I got into the 15th century. It was just this kind of wandering adventure without any big purpose, except I like the territory. And then having the book that's in the drawer is that story, The Mistress of Remedy, that I couldn't, I sent out queries to 100 agents, and people were complimentary about the writing, but, I didn't get anybody to represent it. So, if I live long enough, maybe I'll go back and look at it again. But that's how I got into the period. And having done so much research in the period, I had equity there, because I had stuff to draw on. And in researching that book, I stumbled on the story that I just finished.
Ron, do you have your hand up, or are you?
Scratching your head.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. In our breakout, we didn't have any great authors in there, but I think the point we were all making was we're all about 75, 76. If you haven't done it, you really ought to think about writing a memoir about your life and all the stories. I think Christian said he had 76 stories. I have my book on running rivers for 60 years. There are things that your unborn grandkids are going to want to know about you, and will have no one to ask. But if you write it down, there's a good chance that they'll be satisfied with the history of your family. So you don't need to be a published author or fiction, nonfiction. You've got a audience, which is your family, and I encourage you to write as much as you can. My thought.
There are things about me I don't want my grandchildren to know.
Well, the other thing, Ron, that some folks do is they make videos
Right.
and talk, because it's easier for them to talk than to write. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the things in my family that we're missing is, what are those stories?
Ed McPherson has his hand up.
Go ahead.
I just want to comment. Greg Meister made a great video of the visit everyone had to Gettysburg that was narrated by Peter Hassinger. And that's a great gift to our class. I think it's on the 67 website if you roused around it a little bit. But I just wanted to thank both Peter and Greg for that contribution.
Yeah. Thanks, Ted. Forgot about that.
It was well done.
Yeah.
And Peter, you said you might, you're concerned about what the grandkids may hear. If you write it, they'll at least be getting the true story rather than rumors from other people.
Thanks. Excellent point, Terry. Thank you.
I'm not writing the true story of my life. I'm just writing my story of my life.
My version. Hey, Chris. That's funny. I don't know if I recommend it. It's also really hard to start. particularly at this age. And one of the things, like when I got the agent for this most recent book, though it didn't find a publisher yet, he didn't know how old I was. So I didn't want him to know, because he writes me and says, I think this could really go as a series. And do you have some ideas for books 2, 3, and 4? You know, and I'm going, I might not be around for books 2, 3, and 4. You know what I mean? This was 6 years writing this one. Anyway, I did come up with a few ideas for him, but we'll see.
Hey, Peter, there's an old saying in the law: when you have bad facts, you're better explaining them on your terms than letting your opponent explain it on their terms. So you can kind of characterize it the way you want to that way.
Thanks. These are very good suggestions.
Yeah, I think all autobiographies are the story as they want it told, right?
Yeah.
Because then you read the biography and it's different. I'm sort of interested to know what people do read. With this group, are you fiction readers?
Good question.
No,
Mess up, guys.
Ron says no.
Fiction, yes.
Not ahead.
fiction.
Nonfiction puts me to sleep. So
Well, what's the genres that you like to read?
Nonfiction, history, New Yorker, Atlantic, whatever.
It's curious. I'm part of a couples book group, and the women all like to read fiction and the men all like to read nonfiction.
That's right.
Different genes, I guess.
Well, women are a disproportionate audience for fiction. I mean, a surprising number of fiction books are written for women, by women, and are read by women. And so it's not surprising, Harry, that you see that trend. Women are bigger readers than men generally. And a lot, with my sister, who reads all the time, she'll recommend a book and then I'll look it up and I'll tell her, it's a girl book. I'm not interested in a girl book. But there's a lot of girl books.
Yeah, that's very true.
all romance type books.
Sorry?
Are there romance type books? Is that what?
Well,
That's
it's
what
not
I
just
see.
romance. It's just usually about family relationships, divorce, whatever. It's about living your life usually as a woman, from a woman's perspective.
How else could it be?
Yeah, it's just more than half the human race.
Jim, has anyone recommended?
I'm not gonna write that book. It's like I don't know how to write that.
Jim, has anyone recommended that your next novel should be called Spun? Just a thought.
I'm sure there's a lot of fans of courtroom drama, which I am, and I'm waiting for Terry Sands
Terry's
to get
book.
published.
Yeah.
Well, there's no courtroom in the one I'm currently reading yet, but it's certainly a lot about the behind the scenes life of being an attorney for a big firm.
Well, I read a lot of fiction, and fiction, and the reason I do is because while I'm teaching and mediating, I'm reading all kinds of nonfiction stuff, and so fiction is kind of a way to escape from that and get into a different realm.
I'm waiting for Trump's real trials rather than Terry's next fiction book.
That would be fun.
Yes. Palin's
When-
wasn't so interesting.
When I was still working, I had an official reason to read the transcript of Trump's deposition in the Trump University case.
Wow.
And it was, I had to do it. I was told I had to do it. Oh my God. If you could ever get that guy on a witness stand, you'd be the happiest lawyer in the world. Because he gleefully incriminates himself at every turn.
Is there better fiction than his lawyers would write,
That's
They're
true.
not very good at that. Yeah.
We can only hope. We can only hope.
Listen, we could continue this discussion. It's been great conversation from our class fiction writers, but I don't know if it's unfortunate, but we only get 75 to 90 minutes, and hopefully these discussions will continue offline. What I'd like to mention is that maybe some of you get EAF notes. There was an interesting piece that authors and others might want to tune into by a professor at Williams, speaking shortly about the process of researching and writing a speculative novel in progress. Did anybody see that in the EAF notes today?
Yeah, I did.
So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you want
Yeah.
to follow up, who knows, there might be some tips for our authors.
Well, the other thing is I Googled her, and she's, written a number of novels. She's Dominican, and she tends to write stories about Dominican people, and sounds like she's quite an accomplished writer.
Oh, cool. That's Thursday, the 24th.
Mhm.
That's right.
Yeah.
I watched the one today, and pretty spectacular presentation on a fairly arcane subject, but boy, it'd be fun to be back in the classroom listening to the faculty that Williams now has.
I'd like to call on John Huffner.
I was just gonna say, Chris, to follow up on that is basically during our reunion, which is happening on the 9th to the 12th. You come back and you'll be hearing a lot of different professors talk, and it's always exciting when we have an opportunity to do that, to expand our own thinking about what's going on at the school. And we're just one of the things that we've decided to do and have been working on is just continuing this program for the class. I think it's really, we've had a lot of feedback, and a lot of us have gotten to know better people that we may not have known very well at college, or people we've known well, and to find out things about them. And it's just been a wonderful, I think, a wonderful experience. And we have 3 more before our reunion that are coming up, and they've been scheduled. They're going to come out. Excuse me. Alan's going to release those, I think, Monday or Tuesday next week in terms of the 3. But the next one is going to be John Roberts, who's been a landscape architect all of his career, and he has been very much involved in public programs, the Muir Woods and Muir Beach, and going to be talking about the difference in conservation viewpoints from the time that Muir Woods was started to when they did the project on Muir Beach. And that should be a great one. Then we're going to have Tom Merrick, Harry Matthews, and Harry Schooley will be doing a presentation on the record and when we were there, and how we were so serious over so many different things, and we had a real sense of we knew what was right, and to look at that from 55 years later, they've been working on this. That's going to be a fun presentation, as tonight's was. And then Tom Parker is going to be speaking on May 19th. And Tom was 2 classes behind us, but he was
Froze. Is that us?
Lost you,
director.
huh?
Tom, you've lost me?
Yeah, froze.
We got your back.
Okay, but Tom Parker is going to be speaking on really college admissions in the small colleges, and some of the work that he's done in terms of expanding the thinking on admissions. And so we'll get his perspective. That's going to be in May. So we really have a few going on, and we're looking forward to doing some topics, and we're discussing that in the next week at our reunion. So we'll probably have 2 different pieces at the reunion. So I hope that you'll all come back.
Gone again.
Hey, Harry,
Hey,
Yes, sir.
And
Harry,
I can hear you, Turner.
Harry, can I give you a note, sort of a downer note? But I
And
think
think
this
very
is
seriously.
appropriate. I think this is appropriate.
Go ahead,
Greg, I
Turner.
don't know if you know Greg Meister. I know Peter Hassinger probably knows this, but Greg lost his wife earlier this
Yeah.
month.
Yeah, I was
And,
gonna, yeah, Turner.
Yeah, I think John
and
was
there
going
were-
to speak to that.
I wanted to speak to that because we also lost another classmate in the last, in this last month, and that was Leonard Spencer. And Leonard was living in Vermont. He was a teacher for many years, and then he got into restoration of houses and got into paint colors and restoration paint colors and made a living doing that. But I think it's appropriate to think about him tonight because he also was a poet, and he wrote a book of poetry during his life, and he's survived by his wife Susan and 3 children. And I think it's just appropriate to always think about all of those who have added so much to our lives and to be a part of it. And Greg, we know you lost Gail this last month, and that's been really a tough thing. I know I heard your ceremony for Gail and Miriam's, your speech and Miriam's talk, and what a wonderful life you have led and with your spouse. And our spouses are also a part of all of us, and we wish to extend our condolences. And I really just want to say this has been great. I thank you all for doing this. I know our crew has. Larry, I always thank you for your technical ability, and Harry and Alan and Ken. We've had a wonderful time putting this all together, and we're going to continue to do it. And we just hope you'll sign up and come to the next ones and sign up for reunion. So nice to see you all. It really has been.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks,
everybody.
Jim.
Thank you.
Great
See you
job,
all.
guys. Great
Thanks
job.
for coming.
Yeah,
See you next
terrific.
time.
Buenas noches.
Yes.
Bye.
Buenas noches.
Huh? Bingo.